Before you dive into this heartbreaking story, I want you to take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a cry for help, a journey through fear, pain, and an unexpected miracle that changed everything. If this story touches your heart even a little, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. By doing so, you're not just supporting this channel. You're standing
Your
beside
support
every
gives
soul
these stories a
that
voice,
has ever suffered.
and together,
in silence,
we
can make sure none of them are ever forgotten. What if the person you trusted most was the one who destroyed you every single night? Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will break your heart, shake your soul, and prove that sometimes the darkest secrets hide right inside our own home. Don't look away. This is the story of how I survived. I still remember the sound of the door handle twisting in the dark, as if the night itself conspired against me. The metal squeaked softly, a sound so small, yet it cracked my chest open with terror. My grandfather's shadow stretched across the wall before I could even see, a tall figure swallowing the faint glow of the street light leaking through the curtain. I would hold my breath, praying to God, to anyone he entered my room tonight, every night, his mind without fail. That maybe tonight he'd forget. And I was trapped inside a silence so heavy it felt like chains around my ribs. At 12 years old, I thought this was simply the law of my existence. He would sit at the edge of my bed, his weight sinking the mattress, and whisper things that made no sense, but sounded final, like threats disguised as affection. Family is all They'll
we
think
have,
you're broken,
he would say.
My body froze,
his voice both soft
my mind
and
fled.
iron.
If you ever speak,
small crack
no
on
one
the
will
ceiling,
believe you. Counting, measuring, wishing for the sun to rise fast. And in those hours, childhood dissolved into something unrecognizable, something that didn't feel like life, but like a scent. It went on for years, silently, invisibly, until silence itself became my second skin. At school, teachers praised me for discipline, with the stiffness of for responsibility, pretending my friends never saw the trembling in my hands because I hid them under the desk. I wore long sleeves even in summer because shame clung to my skin like sweat. Every day felt like walking through a theater where everyone else had lines to play, while I carried a secret script etched into my bone. And every night, the same door handle, the same shadow, was the strangest the same part. Hill replayed. I hated like myself a cruel more than him. I didn't believe him the lie first. He planted that I was guilty, that I invited, that silence was the price of belonging. But as the years stretched, the seed of hate grew inside me like a tree without sunlight, twisting, gnarled, unavoidable. I began to feel its roots pressing against my lungs. There were nights I pressed my face into the pillow, screaming without sound. I wondered if my throat just would collapse no from holding back words would hear me that burned to escape. Then came the first sacrifice. When I was 60, I received a letter from a university in another city, Boston, 300 miles away. A scholarship, freedom on paper. I showed it to my mother, and her eyes flickered with something fear, hesitation, maybe denial. My grandfather sat at the table, peeling and
Family
with
needs you here.
precision. Think of
Everything
everything
we've
we've
done
done
for
for
you.
you.
Disturb him.
She didn't
My
look
mother
at
said
me when she
you
said
can't
it.
go.
The scholarship slipped from my fingers like water, and I watched it sink into the silence of our house. I told myself it was okay, that sacrifice was necessary, that family was worth it. But deep down, I knew the truth. They had chained me to the very place that was killing me. That night, the door
Each
opened
night
again,
carved away
and I
at the
realized that
person
the years
I
of
could have been
sacrifice
were
each
not
morning
noble,
I
they were
stitched
stolen.
myself together with invisible thread, only to be ripped apart again. I thought this would last forever, that my life was a circle with no exit, until the night of the miracle. The night everything shifted, not because of courage I had none, but because fate finally collided with truth. And when it did, nothing was the same again. The miracle
quietly,
didn't arrive with
disguised
trumpets or
in the
lightning, ordinary, like most truths that change everything. But before that moment, there were years long, suffocating years where manipulation was the only language spoken in our house. My grandfather was the master of it, and my mother, though she never admitted it, became both his accomplice and his prisoner. I was 17 when I started to notice the invisible strings he controlled. Every money
dollar,
was one of
like
them.
it
was oxygen, rationing it out only when obedience was guaranteed. We gave you everything, he'd say whenever I asked for something as simple as $20 for school supplies. You owe us. Nothing is free in this life. That phrase lodged itself in my brain, tattooed across my thoughts. You owe us. It was repeated so many times, I started believing
Manipulation
I was a
seeped
rather
into
than
holidays,
a daughter.
birthdays,
A burden dressed even
as
the
blood.
most ordinary dinners. If I laughed too loudly with friends, he'd say I was ungrateful. If I came home late from studying, he'd accuse me of betraying family. My mother, standing by the sink with her hands in soapy water, would whisper, "Just keep quiet. Don't make him angry. We need him. We need him." But what about what I needed? Yet
no one
spoken with
asked.
the same
No
calmness
one cared.
as asking
Then
me
came
to
the
set
request.
table.
Impossible.
I was 19,
Unthinkable.
working part-time at a diner, saving what little I could in a jar hidden under my bed. One night at dinner, my grandfather leaned back in his chair, chewing slowly, his eyes fixed on me. "It's time you contribute," he said. "There's a loan I need under your name. Your credit is clean. You'll sign the papers." My
What?
fork clattered
It's
against
family,
the plate, he said, his tone carrying the weight of a final verdict. "We've fed you, sheltered you, sacrificed for you. Now it's your turn." I looked at my mother, desperate for some kind of shield, but she lowered her eyes, staring at the mashed potatoes, as if they were the most important thing in the world. That silence was louder than any scream. I refused at first. My
He
voice
leaned
shook
forward then,
my palms sweated,
the knife in his
but I
hand,
said,
still wet with
"I
gravy.
can't do that, Doc," and
I
whispered, "If you refuse, you'll regret it. Remember, no one will believe you. Not about anything. Not ever." And there it was again, the same shadow that had haunted my nights, now looming over my future, stretching into every choice I thought I had. They wanted me to sacrifice my freedom, my credit, my chance at a life
because that's
prison.
what years of
And
manipulation
do.
They shrink your
part
sense
of
of
me
self
almost
until
agree.
you can't tell the difference between obedience and survival. That night, when the door handle twisted again at 2:47 a.m., something inside me broke differently. I no longer prayed for it to stop. I prayed for a way out. For the first time, I began to imagine that escape might not come from silence, but from exposing
The discovery
lie
came not
that had
in a
defined
scream,
my
not
entire
in
life,
a confrontation,
but in a thin envelope slipped through the mail slot on a rainy Tuesday morning. I remember the way the paper felt damp, fragile, like it had been waiting years to arrive. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to my mother. But she wasn't home, and the curiosity inside me was louder than the fear that usually kept me silent. I tore it open at
undeniable
the kitchen table.
numbers,
My
rows
fingers
of
trembling,
deposits.
and
Inside was a
withdrawals
bank
that
statement
made no
numbers.
sense.
Tens of thousands of dollars listed under my grandfather's name. More shocking still, a trust fund with my name on it. Money I never knew existed. Money that had been left by my father, the father I was told had abandoned us with nothing when I was just a baby. My chest went cold. I read the numbers again. He had
And
left
again.
me security,
My eyes
a future,
scanning for
and
mistakes.
for nearly 2
But
decades.
it was clear
My
grandfather
father
had
had
been
left me
draining it.
penniless. Every dollar, every cent. That was the truth. The nights of guilt, the years of sacrifice, the endless sermons about how much I owed them. It had all been a lie, carefully constructed, weaponized to keep me silent and compliant. When my mother came home, I confronted her. I held up the paper
For a
like
moment,
it was a torch.
she looked
in the
10
dark.
years older.
What is
You
this?
weren't
Why
supposed to
didn't
see
you tell
that,
me?
she
Her
whispered.
face collapsed. Why? My voice cracked. Why would you let him take everything? Why would you let him lie to me all these? She sat down, her hands covering her face. Because he said it was for us. Because he said your father didn't care. Because he said family comes first. And I believed him. Or maybe I just didn't have the strength to fight. My mother wasn't
That
just
was the moment
complicit.
the
She
world
was broken
tilted.
in her own way, bound by the same chains that held me. But the difference was she had accepted them. She had traded her silence for survival. I couldn't. I wouldn't. That night, when the door handle twisted at 2:47 a.m., I wasn't the same. My body still shook, my lungs still locked, but in my chest there was something new. I knew then, sharp
and
that the
burning,
miracle I had
fire
been
that
waiting
no
for
lie
wasn't
could
some
smother
outside
anymore.
rescue. The miracle was the truth itself, revealed in ink and numbers, impossible to deny. For the first time, I understood he wasn't invincible. His power wasn't infinite. It was built on deception, on silence, on fear. And once exposed, even the darkest lies begin to wither. But I didn't yet know how dangerous
The night
the truth
after
could
I
be.
found
Once
the
I
bank
decided
statement,
to speak it
I
aloud.
couldn't
sleep. My body paced the room like a caged animal, my mind replaying the lies, the stolen money, the endless manipulation. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the handle twisted again. But this time, something inside me refused to surrender. I sat up straight in bed, my eyes fixed on the door as it creaked open.
His silhouette appeared,
Instead,
tall and
whispered,
immovable. My
like
voice
always,
shaking but
but
sharp.
I didn't
I
lie
know
down.
what you did.
I didn't
He
pretend to
froze.
be
For
asleep.
the first time in years, the script broke. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. He stepped inside, slower than usual, his face half lit by the glow from the hallway. What did you say? I held the paper in my hands, the bank statement I had hidden under my pillow like a secret weapon. I
You
raised
took
it
it.
into
You've
the
been
dim light.
stealing from
I
me
know
all
about
these
the
years.
money. My
For a
father
second,
didn't leave me
I
with
saw
nothing.
it panic.
A flicker in his eyes, the mask slipping. But then he laughed, low and bitter. You think anyone will believe you? You're just a scared little girl who's been living off my roof, my food, my rules. Without me, you're nothing. I wanted to crumble under the weight of his words. They were the same poison he had always used.
You're nothing.
But the
That
truth
money
was mine.
Then
That
the fear
trust was mine.
No,
And you,
I said,
my voice broke,
louder
but
now.
I pushed through it. You've been living off me, not the other way round. His face hardened. He stepped closer, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. But then something unexpected happened. My mother appeared
She
in the
didn't
hallway.
say a word.
Her hair
She
messy
just
from
stared
sleep.
At him,
Her
then
eyes
at me.
wide.
She
And
had
I saw
heard
it, her
everything.
silence cracking. The decades of obedience, the years of swallowing truth, they shattered in that instant. She whispered, barely audible, "Is it true?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was confirmation enough. My mother stepped fully into the room, her voice trembling, but fierce. You lied to us, not to me. I had always believed
and that was
my
the
mother would
unexpected
never take
turn.
my side, that she was too deep in his shadow to ever escape. But in that moment, standing in the pale hallway light, she looked at him, not as her father, but as the man who had stolen her daughter's future. Something shifted that night. The house was no longer his king. The silence that had protected him for so long was gone, ripped open by the truth. But
Because
because
once
once
a
a
lie
lie
wasn't
is
the
exposed,
end,
the real
the
battle
liar
hadn't
becomes
even
dangerous.
begun. And my grandfather was not the kind of man who surrendered without a fight. The house was never quiet again after that night. The silence that once cloaked everything had been ripped apart, and what replaced it was chaos, raw, loud, unstoppable. My grandfather no longer crept into my room. At 2:47 a.m., he stormed through the house
Every
instead.
corner,
His
every
presence
room
heavier
carried the
than
echo
ever
of his anger,
voice sharpened.
the morning
into
after
threats.
our
confrontation, he slammed his fist against the kitchen table so hard that the plates rattled. You think you've won because of a piece of paper? You think you're clever? His face was red, his veins bulging at the temples. That money was never yours. It was mine the moment your father left it. I raised you. I fed you. That makes
Her
it
voice
mine. Was shaking. I
but
stared
firm
at him.
no.
It
My
was
throat
never
burning.
yours. You
But
told
before
us
I could
lies,
answer,
and I let
my
you,
mother spoke.
but not anymore. The room froze. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. His own daughter turned against him. For a moment, I thought he might strike her, and I tensed, ready to throw myself between them. But he didn't. Instead, he smirked, cold and cruel, and said, "You think anyone
That
will
was
believe
the day
you?
the
You're
lines
weak.
were drawn.
She's weak."
My mother began
Without
to
me,
slip notes
you're
of
nothing
courage
but beggars.
into small acts, locking my bedroom door, saving receipts, making quiet phone calls when he was out of the house. She was still afraid, but she was no longer blind, and I began to plan. Escape was no longer a dream. It was a strategy, a necessity. But the more we pushed back, the more desperate he
Go
became.
on.
He
started
started one
threatening
evening
to cut us off,
his voice
to
echoing
throw
through
us
the
out
narrow
of the
hallway.
house.
"See how far you get without me. The world will eat you alive." He underestimated me. He underestimated both of us. Because when you've lived years in chains, even the smallest taste of freedom is enough to make you fight with a ferocity you didn't know you had. The unexpected twist was this: my mother, who had been his silent ally
The same
for so
woman
long, who once
began
told me
to
to
turn
stay
into my
quiet, was
partner.
now telling me, late at night in whisper, "We have to leave. We can't survive this anymore." But leaving wasn't simple. He had taken everything: our money, our trust, our voices. Walking out meant stepping into nothing, into uncertainty. And yet, it felt safer than staying. The miracle, I began to realize, wasn't just that the truth
Two broken
came to
voices
light.
becoming
The miracle was
and
that
that
my
union
mother
was
and
something
I,
he couldn't
for
control.
the first time, no matter how
standing
much
on
he
the same
threatened.
side.
Still, I knew the war wasn't over. He was too proud, too consumed by control, to let us go easily. And when pride is wounded, it lashes out in the most violent ways. The tension in the house became unbearable, like living inside a storm that never broke. Every step echoed. My
Every whisper
grandfather's
carried
eyes
danger.
followed us constantly, dark pools of suspicion, as if he knew we were planning something even before we did. And in a way, he was right. My mother and I had begun preparing in secret, collecting documents, hiding small amounts of cash, making quiet plans for escape. But the more we prepared, the more violent his grip became. One night, just after midnight, I heard him shouting,
"You
in
think
the
you
kitchen.
can betray
His
me
voice boomed
in my
against the
own
walls.
house?"
Words
I
slurred
crept
with
down the
rage,
stairs,
my heart hammering, and saw him with a bottle of whiskey half empty on the table. My mother stood opposite him, pale and trembling, clutching a folder to her chest, the folder that held my birth certificate, my social security card, proof of the trust he had stolen. He lunged for it. She stepped back, her hands shaking so badly. I rushed down the last
papers
steps,
slipped
and
scattered
grabbed
them
across
before
the
he
linoleum
could.
floor. He turned to me then, his face flushed, veins swollen on his forehead. For the first time in my life, I thought he might actually kill me. "Give it to me," he growled, his voice guttural, animal. I held the papers against my chest, my knees weak but refusing to bend. No, the word was small, but it was enough. It was the one word my mother
could
screamed,
never control.
clawing at
His
him,
hand shot
trying
out,
to pull him
grabbing
away.
my arm
the
with
room
a
became
force
chaos
that
shots,
burned into
hands,
my skin.
Papers fluttering like broken wings around us. And then, suddenly, he let go. Not because of mercy, but because the front door slammed open. What if I'd told you that one single night, one single, unimaginable moment was enough to change a life forever?
This story is darker and deeper
So
than
before
you
we
could
begin,
ever imagine.
make sure you
And by the
subscribe
end,
right now
you'll
and leave a
understand
like,
because
because
every
every
new
new
subscriber helps us share stories that the world tries to hide. Stay with me until the very end. I promise you won't be the same after hearing this. It was my uncle, my mother's younger brother, who lived across town. He had received one of her whispered phone calls earlier that week. A plea for help she never thought he'd answer. But here he was, standing in the doorway, eyes wide as he took in the scene, my mother crying, me clutching documents like they were life itself, and my grandfather, red-faced and shaking, a monster exposed under the kitchen light. What the hell is going on here? My uncle demanded. For once, my grandfather had no words. The master of lies stood frozen, his mouth open. The weight was
of
there,
truth
pressing
raw,
down on
undeniable.
him. That was the most
In the
dangerous
bruises
night,
on
my arm, because
and the
violence
rage
was
in
no
his
longer
eyes.
hidden. And yet, it was also the night his power cracked. Someone else had seen. The silence was shattered beyond repair. I realized then that miracles don't always come in divine light. Sometimes they arrive in the form of an unexpected witness, a door opening at the exact right moment. But the fight wasn't over. Exposing him in that kitchen he had
was
built
one
was
thing.
something far more dangerous. The night my uncle walked in, the house shifted forever. My grandfather tried to mask his fury, to rebuild the authority that had cracked, but the mask no longer fit. My uncle didn't believe the lies. He saw the papers scattered on the floor, the bruises blooming on my arm, the terror on my mother's face. And though he didn't speak much that night, the silence between him and my grandfather was thick with something new, exposure. In the days that followed, the atmosphere became suffocating. My grandfather hovered like a predator sensing prey slipping from his grasp. He slammed doors, barked orders, watched us with narrowed eyes, as if daring us to move. My mother whispered plans to me in the bathroom, the only place we could lock the door. In the laundry on basket. Friday, we'll
she
take
said,
the bus to
her
Albany,
voice
quivering, then figure out the rest. Every second until Friday felt like walking on glass. I went to work at the diner, pretending everything was normal. But inside my chest was a countdown, each tick louder than the last. My hand shook when I poured coffee. I snapped at customers without meaning to. I imagined his face
When
showing
Friday
up
came,
in the window, the air his
itself
hand
felt
on my
charged,
shoulder, like a
dragging
storm
me
pressing
back
down
before
on the
I
roof.
could escape.
We waited until midnight. My mother carried the laundry basket filled with clothes and hidden documents. I carried nothing but my backpack and the jar of crumpled bills I had saved for you, my tiny rebellion against his control. We tiptoed down the stairs, every creak of the wood sounding like an alarm. At
My
the
heart
front door,
pounded so
my
loudly
mother's
I
hands
thought it
trembled
might wake
as
him.
she slid the key into the lock. The click was deafening, and then the light switched on. He was standing there, in the hallway, his face a mask of rage and triumph. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice low, almost calm, which made it more terrifying. My mother froze. I couldn't breathe. He stepped closer, eyes burning into mine. You think you
The
can
word
leave
twisted
me
in my
after
gut like a
everything
knife.
I've done
His
for you?
sacrifices
After
were
all
my
the
prison.
sacrifices
For a moment,
I made,
time stopped.
sacrifices,
The bus schedule, the packed basket, the escape, all of it collapsed in the glow of that single light bulb. He reached for the basket, his fingers curling around the handle. And then, from outside, headlights swept across the window. A horn honked twice. My uncle. He had come back. The distraction was enough. My mother yanked the basket free, grabbed my arm, and shouted, "Run!" We burst through the door, into the night air that felt like fire in my lungs. My grandfather shouted behind us, his footsteps pounding, but we didn't look back. We ran to the car where my uncle sat with the engine running. The doors slammed shut, and as the car pulled away, I finally turned to see my grandfather in the driveway. His figure shrinking in the rearview mirror. The door didn't open. His face twisted in a scream. I couldn't hear. For the first time in years, I was free from that house. But freedom wasn't peace, not yet, because escaping his walls was only the beginning. Escaping his voice, his control, the scars he left that would take far longer. Freedom didn't feel the way I imagined. I thought it would taste sweet, like fresh air after years of suffocation. But the first
Like
night
sunlight
away,
on skin
sleeping on
that
a
had
sagging
only
couch
known
in
shadows.
my uncle's small apartment, I couldn't close my eyes. Every creak of the pipes made me flinch. Every movement outside the window dragged me back to that room at 2:47 a.m. I kept staring at the door, waiting for the handle to twist, waiting for the shadow to return. Freedom felt fragile, like glass that could shatter at any second. He gave us his bedroom. My uncle tried to help cook in the ways he knew how, and beans, and told us not to worry about rent. But even his kindness felt temporary, like we were guests in a life that wasn't ours. My mother sat at the kitchen table most nights, staring at the document she had rescued, her hands shaking, as if the ink itself carried weight too heavy to hold. "He'll come after us," she whispered once. Phone calls came late at night. "He won't let the line go." Silent, and in some ways, breathing. She was right. It clicked off. Letters arrived with no return address, scrawled with accusation. Ungrateful liars. Each envelope was another attempt to drag us back into his cage. But I didn't fold this time. I took a job at a bookstore, stacking shelves for minimum wage. The smell of paper and ink grounding me in a world. I opened a separate bank account in my own name. My first step toward reclaiming what had been stolen. Each deposit, no matter how small, $63.25 1 week, $112.40 the next, felt like a rebellion. Still, nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, hearing his voice in my head, the old threats looping like a broken tape. "No one will believe you." It was during one of those nights, "You're nothing," that my mother came into I believed the room, him, sitting on the edge of the couch. Back. She looked wrapping itself around my ribs, than her whispering years, that but there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Determination. "We have to go to the police," she said soft. The word itself made my stomach twist. Police meant exposure, investigation, questions I wasn't sure I could answer.
It meant dragging the
but it
nightmare
also
out
meant
into
the possibility
of justice,
risking the world's
of finally
disbelief.
breaking the chains completely. I wanted to say no. I wanted to keep hiding, keep surviving in the shadows. But then I thought of all the years lost, the lies, the bruises that no one else had ever seen. I thought of the money drained from my future, the door that opened every night at 2:47 a.m. And I realized survival wasn't
That moment
wasn't
anymore.
cinematic.
I didn't want
there
to
were
just
no fireworks.
survive. I
No
wanted
triumphant
to live.
music.
So
Just
I
two
nodded
broken
double
voices,
quotes, yes,
agreeing
let's
to step
do it.
into the light, no matter how much it burned. We didn't know then how messy, how painful, how terrifying the process would be. But we had taken the first step, and sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do. Walking into the police station felt like walking into
The
another
walls were
kind
cold,
of prison. The fluorescent lights harsh, and the smell of coffee and paper filled the air. My palms sweated so badly, I had to wipe them on my jeans. My mother held the folder against her chest, the one she had nearly lost on the kitchen floor, the one that contained the story of our lives in documents and numbers. The officer who greeted us was polite but detached, scribbling notes
When
as
it was
my
my
mother
turn.
explained.
Her
I felt
voice
the
cracked,
familiar choke
but
in
she
my
forced
throat.
each word
How
out
could
like
I
she
put
was
years of
spitting
silence
stones
into sentences? How could I describe the sound of a door handle turning at 2:47 a.m.? But I did. My voice broke, my eyes blurred, but I told them. I told them everything. And as I spoke, I watched the officer's expression shift, first disbelief, then anger, then something else. Papers
Belief.
were collected
for the first
signatures analyzed.
Someone
outside
bank
those
accounts
walls
traced.
believed me.
The truth,
Investigations
written in
began,
ink
and numbers was undeniable. The money my father had left me, siphoned for years, stood as evidence stronger than my words ever. But even stronger were the scars I carried, the testimony that no longer shook with silence, but burned with the day of the hearing. I sat in the courthouse, my legs bouncing uncontrollably, not as the towering figure who had haunted my nights, but as an old man in a wrinkled suit, his face twisted with defiance. He looked at me once, his eyes still full of venom, and for a second, the 12-year-old inside me trembled. But then I reminded myself he wasn't a god. He wasn't invincible. He was just a man whose power had been built on lies. The lawyers spoke. The evidence was shown. And my mother's voice trembled, but didn't break when she told the truth under oath. When it was my turn, I stood up, my knees weak, and looked directly at the judge. He stole my father's legacy. He stole my childhood, but he doesn't get to steal my future. For the first time in my life, my voice echoed in a room where it mattered. The verdict came quickly. He didn't look of fraud when the guilty of theft, but I didn't of abuse cloaked in silence. The sound of that gavel was louder than every whisper, every threat, every creak of that door handle at 2:47 a.m. Walking out of that courthouse, I expected to feel triumphant, weightless. Instead, I felt hollow, as if victory itself was just another kind of exhaustion. My mother squeezed my hand, tears sliding down her face.
With a verdict.
It's over.
Freedom
she
didn't
whispered,
erase the years
but I knew
already
better.
stolen.
It wasn't
what it
over.
gave me was something smaller, but more powerful, a beginning. And beginnings, I realized, are miracles too. The silence feels different now. Not the suffocating silence of my old bedroom, where every creak of the floorboard meant terror was on its way. This silence is wider, cleaner, almost sacred. It's the kind
the
of
scars
silence
are still here,
that holds
some
space
of them
for
visible,
breathing,
faint
for
lines
rebuilding,
on my skin,
for existing
where his
without
grip
fear.
once burned.
Others buried deeper, carved into the way I flinch at sudden noises, the way I avoid looking at door handles in the dark. Healing isn't a straight path, it's a winding road, with nights where the past reaches out and whispers that it still owns me. Yet I keep walking. I think about the years lost, 6, 10, I think about
nearly
the
20
scholarships
of
I
them
never
sacrificed
on
the
the friends
altar of
I
lies.
never trusted. The version of myself that never had the chance to grow without change. But I also think about what I've gained. The truth, the strength that comes only from surviving fire. The bond with my mother rebuilt from ashes. People like to talk about miracles as sudden bursts of light, divine intervention that erase the pain and make everything
My miracle
perfect.
was not a flash
That's
of
not
heaven,
what saved me, but the slow, painful cracking of silence. A bank statement, a witness at the door, a voice finally spoken in court. Small things that built into a truth too powerful to stay buried. Sometimes I replay the sound of the gavel in my head. It doesn't erase the sound of the door opening at 2:47 a.m., but it competes with it. Two sounds, side by side, the horror
And
of
maybe
what was,
that's what healing
and the
really
justice
is.
of what came
Not
after. Forgetting the sound of the past, but learning to let new sounds echo louder. Now, when I lie in bed at night, I still listen. But what I hear isn't footsteps in the hallway. It's my own breath, steady and strong. It's the hum of the city outside, alive and indifferent, reminding me that the world is bigger than him, bigger than the house that
I
tried
am
to
the
keep
woman
me
who
caged.
spoke,
I
who
am
ran,
not the girl
who stood
who
in the
froze
light
silence
even when it
anymore.
burned.
And though the scars remain, they are proof not of weakness, but of survival. The miracle wasn't that I was saved. The miracle was that I saved myself.